Cool. So it has gone 10 o'clock. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm not sure if we have people from outside of South Africa. Let me go and look up the list. No, yes, but I think you're on the same uh, time zone as us, Botswana, so we're still morning, so that's good. Okay, I think I can safely say good morning to everybody. So good to see you, and welcome to one of my favorite sessions that we do here with you, and it's called Converse and Connect. And if this is the first time that you've joined one of our Converse and Connects, welcome. Good to have you here. It's a conversation. It's an opportunity for us to connect. It's an opportunity for us to explore thoughts about a particular topic that impact our mental wellness. And so I am going to ask you to be brave for me today. And if you have any questions, any comments, if you'd like to contribute, if you'd like to connect with us, please do so on the chat. You can even switch or put up your hand, and we can even come to you and we can pop your mic on if you would like to. So an opportunity really just to connect and to talk and to have a conversation about this thing that we are calling Beyond Bias today. So that's my only rule. My only rule for the session is, please, if you would love to contribute, don't be shy, contribute, pop it on the chat, say hello, let's talk, let's move through the chat, let's discuss and grow from each other. Let's connect on that chat. So we're going to be doing a lot of the chatting here like this, but we're going to ask you to do exactly that on the chat. And I'm going to introduce you to our guest in just a moment. You would see that her camera is on and she's ready to rock and roll. But before we do that, what are we doing in today's Converse and Connect? Okay, we're going to explore something that I like to call the hidden forces that shape our thoughts, shape our decisions, shape often our overall mental well-being. Today, we're going to dive into this concept of unconscious bias. It's these automatic negative, listen to me. I always say negative because it's automatic negative thoughts. That's not it. I'm talking about automatic mental shortcuts that our brains like to take without us even realizing it. Our almost automatic responses to things, where our brain doesn't use all of its resources because it has to make quick decisions, quick ideas, it has to move forward. And these things we often call biases. We're going to talk about how biases affect our mental health and how me and you can become more aware of our own biases and how we can begin to use those. I want to start today, before we even jump in, by just allowing the Royal Society to do a better job at explaining to us some of these unconscious biases. And what's interesting about this video is notice how it has begun to influence how they even employ people in the business. So have a look at this as we slowly begin to understand what this thought of unconscious biases are. Please let me know if you can't hear the sound, and then we'll try to fix that. Don't stress too much. There is no sound just yet.
The unconscious mind is amazing. It can process vastly more information than our conscious mind by using shortcuts based on our background, cultural environment, and personal experiences to make almost instantaneous decisions about everything around us. The snag is, it's wrong quite a lot of the time, especially on matters that need rational thinking. Here's a classic example. A bat and a ball cost £1 10 pence. If the bat costs £1 more than the ball, how much does the ball cost? Most people, including over 50% of students at some of the world's leading universities, get the answer wrong and say 10 pence. The answer is actually 5 pence. Many of us choose 10 pence without thinking. This is because our unconscious mind uses instinct, not analysis. So our unconscious is fallible. It's also biased. It makes snap judgments of people we meet, categorizing them according to gender, social and other characteristics. In milliseconds, we judge whether somebody is like us and belongs to our in-group. These are the people we favor. So men might favor men, while women might favor women. However, we can belong to different in-groups, and we like to be part of an in-group that's powerful, which could mean a woman favoring a man over a woman. That's unconscious bias. All of us have it, and it colors our decisions without our realizing. For example, research reveals that if I were a man, you would be more likely to be nodding in agreement right now because people pay more attention to a male voice. The Royal Society fosters excellence in science, but this can only be achieved if we select from the widest range of talent. And that's not possible if unconscious bias is narrowing down the field for non-scientific reasons. To lessen the impact of unconscious bias, which is easier for us to notice in others, we are raising the awareness of unconscious bias to members of our selection and appointment panels. We're encouraging panel members to deliberately slow down decision-making, reconsider reasons for decisions, question cultural stereotypes, and monitor each other for unconscious bias. We can't cure unconscious bias, but with self-awareness, we can address it.
So one of the reasons why I like that little video is because it also begins to show us how it begins to shape certain decisions that they're starting to make as the Royal Society. And I really like that, right? And so I think it gives us a nice little indication of what we're going to chat about today. So let me introduce you to Kwezi. Kwezi is currently the managing director. She's also the founder and chairperson of the Sisonke Wellness as well as Sisonke Wellness Foundation. She goes all the way back to the time that she was working in PR and communications, and now works her way into and gives us this opportunity to share in her brilliance, working with us here at Mindful Revolution to unpack today what we're calling Beyond Bias. So Kwezi, I'm going to ask you, maybe you sent me a really cool little definition of bias and the difference between bias and stereotypes. And so I'm going to ask you just to jump straight in and unpack that for us. What is this thing we're speaking about today?
Okay, thank you, Grant. Good morning, everybody. Hope everyone is doing well. So as I was preparing for this session, the reason I actually went to look for the difference was because I was like, actually, what is the difference? This sounds like, it sounds like a stereotype, but it also doesn't sound like a stereotype. Like where are we? I'm glad that the video that we just watched gave us a short definition of the unconscious and the conscious. And as I was watching the video, before I even get into the differences, I thought of myself in a previous job that I did, where we were launching in the US. We were launching something in the US, and I needed to market, because I also do marketing, and I needed to market it from here. And already my personal unconscious bias was me thinking, why would anyone in America want to respond to an email coming from a Kwezi Mabunda? They probably think this is someone from Uganda and I'm a scammer. And already that speaks to, I think, the whole entire conversation that we're going to be speaking about. But just maybe to highlight the difference between a bias and a stereotype. A bias is more of a judgment and a preference. It's a feeling. It's more of a feeling. And then a stereotype is when, like how I think I'm stereotyped when it comes to men and women. I really truly believe that when I say woman, I just want to help her, and I feel like a man can take care of himself. A man can provide, a man this and a man that. So a stereotype is more of a belief and an assumption, like how I'm assuming. The other day I was talking to someone who said when she gets a lift from a man, she's never going to pay him because he doesn't need the money to be paid, but a woman does. So it's all these things that are in our heads that we assume or that we believe because we were raised in a certain way.
I really love that. And thanks for unpacking that, because it's important, right? As we go through the conversation, you'll see why that's important. One of the things that I loved about that video, it says towards the end, it says, it's easier to see it in others. And that is exactly right. It's easier to see biases in others. However, today I want us to take a slightly different approach to this thing, because if it is the case, to your point, Kwezi, that I can see it in others and I know it exists in others, then surely it exists in me. And if it exists in me, the question I then have to ask myself is, how does it affect me? In other words, if I know for a fact that it exists in others, it has to exist in me. And how it then exists in others, how it then exists in me and it impacts me is kind of what I want to unpack today. That's what I want to unpack today. I want to begin to start to ask myself the question, like, if it exists in me, what can I begin to do to try to notice it? And why is it impacting me? So, maybe that's sort of the first thing I want to unpack a little bit is, how do you think then in ourselves these biases affect us? How do you think they affect our mental wellness? How do you think they affect my mental well-being?
So when we were talking earlier, I mentioned how I like the take that we doing with this conversation, because usually when you think of bias, you think of how someone else makes you feel, as much as it might be obvious or it might not be conscious. But I've never really thought of how my own bias can affect my mental health, and how, like, I never really put the two together, because I think as humans, we just always, like you said, we always see things in other people, but not in ourselves. But I think that's the key thing when it comes to mental health. Whenever I talk about mental health and people are like, what should we? I'm like, before we talk about anything else, can we just talk about self-awareness first? Let's start with ourselves. When Michael Jackson wrote, I don't know if he wrote it, but when he sang Man in the Mirror, I think he was in the bag, but we didn't realize. We should go back and listen to that song, because I think we all need to just sit down and just look at ourselves before we even leave the house, and just look at how other people are making us feel. But I think one thing that our biases can, or how they can affect our mental health, is I think that it can be like a negative self-talk, where because of your own insecurities, you now look at yourself in a certain way. It can affect your self-esteem. It can also, I guess, it can affect the relationships that we are in without us realizing. And obviously, when our relationships that we are in are affected, then it will affect us. And it doesn't have to be a relationship that's personal. It can be a professional relationship, like you mentioned in the beginning, where biases can happen in the workplace, where I'm a woman, I'm young, I'm Black, I work in a team, and I'm the only Black person in the team. And now I feel like everyone hates me, no one cares. Or I feel like I'm only getting this promotion because I'm Black, and they just want to mark the BEE score. And sometimes it's really about me and my own personal biases when it comes to being a Black young woman. And maybe that's not why I'm getting a promotion. Maybe I am getting the promotion because I deserve it, but I might not think that I deserve it because of how I see things.
I mean, it's such an honest conversation to have, because we don't have this conversation, because sometimes this conversation is politically wrong, in inverted commas, right? We don't have this conversation. I'm reminded of when I was doing my master's thesis. I did it in philosophy, and I did it on the quota system in sport and the philosophical sort of undertones of that. And one of the interesting things that come out, really interestingly enough, is to your point, it affects the psychology of the individual playing in the team, because the individual possibly thinks that they are not there because they deserve to be there, even though they are the best player. So they are the best player, but because you've set up some sort of a system that impacts the psychology of that individual, because of the color of that individual's skin, the psychology begins to affect that person. And again, not really something we talk about, right? It's something we should be speaking about, because to your point, it has the ability to play on me as an individual, because I've grown up in a world that is so biased and so discriminatory that I even start to think that of myself. I start to play that. So, I mean, we often call it, like, in colloquially, like self-hating, right? Like self-hating, right? And then it often plays itself out in the way that the video showed, where what you start to do is try to grow favor with the power group because of the way you feel, right? So and that's also an interesting thing, and I think it's something that we should really often be aware of, right? It's like, how are other people's biases now projecting on me? How is that affecting my mental wellness? Am I starting to believe that rubbish? And am I starting to talk like that? Am I starting to think I should act more straight in front of people when I'm gay? Should I start to speak with a different accent in a room of people because they don't necessarily affect my accent, or they don't necessarily accept my accent? All of those things. How is that impacting you as an individual is really important. I want to go back to something really important that you spoke about, friend, is this idea of it affecting our relationships with others. How do you think our own unconscious biases affect our relationship with others, and, like, sort of almost like our own social well-being? How do you think those things are affected?
I think because we live in a world, but we also live in our heads most of the time. So a lot of things are thoughts, like we mentioned, it's conscious, it's unconscious. So you might have a certain bias, and you might think certain things about someone you are in a relationship with, like I said, personal or professional, and you might not be voicing those thoughts out, but you might be treating that person in an unfair way, because already I'm assuming
Yeah.
this person is this way and they don't need me to maybe be empathetic because they're fine. Or there might be a conflict where I'm assuming one thing and you know the facts, but I'm not really communicating with you in the way that I should be, because obviously still with these biases that we are talking about. And I truly believe the empathy part is really key, because if we are conscious of these things before, I think that also a bias really, it speeds up our decision making. It doesn't help us with taking a pause. I'm having a conversation with you and I'm like, okay, Grant is a man and Grant is telling me he's struggling with 1, 2, and 3. Oh, but he'll be fine. But if I take a moment and I'm like, okay, let's take away the fact that he's a man and blah, blah, blah. He's a human being and he's telling me this. How can I really be of support without assuming this and this and that? So it really will allow us to be more empathetic and supportive. And I think if we are conscious and if we work on these biases, then it will strengthen our relationships and the communication between us and the people around us.
Sure. I just love this, because again, it's like when we speak about biases, when we speak about DEI, we usually speak about, okay, there's a group of people, there is a power struggle, there's a this, that, there's all the rest of it. Let's actually, for a moment, to your point, unpack what it's like to live with those biases and realize that it's not good for you, man. It's not. I mean, as you were speaking, I was thinking, like, can you imagine, exactly to your point, right? Can you imagine that I miss out on the opportunity to connect with you as a human because of the color of your skin? Can you imagine that I miss out on the opportunity to enrich my own life, to enrich my own growth because you're a woman and I'm a man and I don't speak to women because I have some stupid belief system somewhere? And sorry, I'm calling a spade a spade today, but like I've got this archaic belief that women can't be educated and therefore I miss out on all of your wealth. I am worse off for it. Sure, so are you. Absolutely. And I'm not negating that, right? I'm not negating that there is a victim here. I'm not saying that there isn't. But I'm also saying that, isn't it interesting to think about, to your point, that the victim is to the person that has these biases? You know, they fall victim to it. I mean, in a relationship, yeah, I mean, I can only imagine, to your point, let's go back to that idea of connection, right? If I don't take the opportunity to connect with others because I have this bias towards them. I don't have the opportunity. I don't listen to them. I mean, I loved what you said about just the example of what you used, right? No, like a man comes to me and says, you know, I'm feeling X, Y, and Z. And I suppose in your work it's slightly different, but let's just say it's a random at work and you go, oh, but men don't cry, you'll be fine. You know, and you miss the opportunity to connect with a man like that, right?
Even the way we respond immediately, it really will affect the entire relationship, because how I respond when I get a phone call or when I bump into someone and they tell me I'm struggling, and then whatever, whether I go left or right, it will affect how that person reacts to me in the future, but also how they see themselves and how they should behave. And it's like a whole cycle of how things are just going to happen after, because then they also have their own biases. So now it's their own plus mine together, and it's now a volcano of I don't know what.
So what you're saying is that you're saying that my ability to address my biases helps me to improve my empathy.
Yes, I think so. I think it does.
Yeah.
Because you're conscious, and now instead of me saying, oh, you'll be fine, I'll be like, actually, let's sit down and talk about it. Then you'll also take a moment and you'll get into yourself. Maybe you don't even realize that you're struggling and you just said it in passing. So I really believe that in us not only addressing biases, but all these thoughts that we have, these beliefs, questioning the beliefs, the values that we have, and all these things, it really will make us better people. And I actually put down some examples of conscious and unconscious biases, which I think are very interesting, especially at work, because maybe that also might bring in the conversation, and it might bring people into letting us know if they've had any of these experiences. But so I put down a list. So the first one is gender stereotyping, which I've already spoken about. I think that's the most obvious one, but it's obviously not only with women or with men. The first example that I have is when a hiring manager prefers to hire men for leadership roles, because they believe that men are better suited for those positions. They're less emotional, they blah, blah, blah. I actually read the other day a post, I was like, a post that said women are actually less emotional than men, blah blah blah. And I was like, okay, interesting. And then I scrolled past, I saw it on LinkedIn. But maybe the people can let us know what they think. Then the second one is racial discrimination. We've also spoken about that one, where someone avoids interacting with individuals of a particular race because they believe that their race is superior. I mean, I'm guilty of walking into a church or a restaurant and I'm like, oh my goodness, so many white people. What am I going to say? Should I now change the way I'm going to speak? Should I be here? Should I not be here? And vice versa. I mean, that's normal. It's part of how we've been living. There's also educational background where a business owner might prefer to hire graduates from a specific university because they believe that these specific students or these specific products of this university might be better or more competent. And then the last one from conscious biases is ageism, where a company might assume that, or rather they might avoid hiring older workers because they might believe that the younger employees are more tech savvy, the younger, the innovative. But in essence, it's really, all these things are biases, but yeah, it makes life very complicated when we don't realize this because we're not aware.
Yeah. Okay, I love these. So let's do this together, friends. Gender stereotyping, racial discrimination, educational background, and ageism. How many of them can you own? How many of them have you seen that you've stepped into spaces where you've had those particular things, where you've looked at a particular person, you've thought about a particular person, you've said something, and in those, it's there. It's there. And I must tell you that as I started to do the work, you have no idea, and I know you do because of my background, and you can make that connection because of my color, because of how I've grown up in South Africa, being a white male. You can kind of know the rooms I've been in, you can kind of know the conversations I've had, right? You can pretty much make a good assumption about that, and you will be very right, but you have no idea how vile the bias and the discrimination that lived inside of me, and how much work it took to see it and then to start to call it out in my own head. And then it entrenches itself in everything. So it entrenches itself in everything that I do. So much so that I then, because I have these biases, to your point, Kwesi, then the educational one is so fascinating. When I was hiring people, so I worked in radio for many years. I then became what we call it a program manager, but it's technically a person that manages the product and the staff. And do you know that I would literally not employ people that didn't go to a campus radio station? So because why? Because I went to a campus radio station, because all the people that I knew that were good came from a campus radio station. You were not getting past my door if you weren't on a campus radio station. And because of this framework that I'd made for myself and that I was brought into, that's just a perfect example of me just carrying on that stuff, and it's interesting because it comes from, and it's not always the case, but in my case, it came from, because I was there, because I know that that's the good education that they get. I'm going to then use that in my hiring decisions, right? I'm going to use that in a particular way. How we used women on air versus men on air, how men would make up the main anchor and women would make up the co-anchor, because that's always how it was done. How color would play a role. You would have this particular person as being the lead and then this person as not, and then the color and that would play a role. And how, like, man, I had to do a lot of work here. I had to do a lot of work here. And as you were speaking through it, I kept on thinking to myself, thank goodness I started the work. It hasn't been done yet, because what a rubbish life to live. If I'm not giving Kwesi an opportunity to teach me something because of the color of their skin, what a rubbish life I'm living. Let's do this, friends. Gender, racial, educational, ageism. How many of them, and you don't have to put this on the chat, I want you to do this for yourself. How many of them are you falling victim to? How many of them can you see show up in your life? What does that possibly look like as it shows up in your life? The ageism one's an interesting one. Do you think I want to unpack that a little bit, because there's such an interesting thing around, like, hiring younger people versus older people, talking younger people to older people, speaking only to older people. You know, how does ageism sort of play out in your life, Kwezi? Have you noticed it? Have you seen it? What does that look like?
Okay, I've had many lives. And just to say, Ishmael, I see your question and we'll come back to it just now.
Yeah.
So with me, so I worked in corporate for a while. I was at the longest time, but I'm young, so it wasn't really the longest time. And I was young. I think I was actually the youngest in my team. And I mean, all the CEOs were old white men, and I could never see myself as a CEO of that company because I was just like,
Yeah.
obviously, I mean, and this guy is never gonna leave. He's never going to die. He's just always going to be here. And even if they promote me, maybe they think I'm going to be here longer because I'm younger, so it's going to slow down my
Yeah.
pace of growing.
Yeah.
However, now that I run my own business and my own foundation, working with young people, I'm like, okay, I think I see why people want to keep the older generation because it's just a level of
Sure.
immaturity. There's just a lot that you
Sure.
have to deal with where I get it now because you have to teach a younger person longer. So
Yeah.
because I'm on the other side, now I maybe I'm also biased. I don't know. I need to think about this, but I get the reasoning and the logic behind some things.
Yeah.
But also I like that you mentioned how you were doing things because that's how it's always been done.
Yeah.
Because I think it also speaks to Ishmael's question around how do we change people's perceptions to hire the best and not according to color? Because it's really easy to just continue doing things the way they've been done because change is hard. So that is a very tricky question, honestly. But when Grant was speaking, I was like, maybe that's the answer to the question. Maybe the question should be, what are we doing that we've always been doing and how can we change that? So maybe that's a start. And
Yeah.
obviously we as employees, we have these conversations with each other, and I don't know if the leaders in the businesses have these conversations. And I know it's not easy to walk up to a CEO. I mean, I would do it.
Sure.
I would go to a CEO and question why things are being done. I think that's why I became a mental health advocate, because I can't stand some things, and I think that's why I also had to step away from corporate because I just had a big mouth. But I think maybe we should also have so many conversations that it leads to the right place, and also not conversations where we're victimizing ourselves and it's like a pity party and it's like, oh, woe is me. But let's have productive conversations and let's see how, because I truly believe that change starts with conversations. And
Yeah.
hopefully we can have these conversations with the right people. I don't think I can go to HR and tell HR and question why HR is doing things the way they're doing it. But maybe in us having conversations that are productive and helpful, we might actually find solutions and be able to have a conversation that is actually going to inspire change.
Yeah, I mean, I love that, asking the question. I really like that. I want to re-emphasize that is, have we done it like this? And if the answer is yes, why? So just keep on asking that question. Just keep on asking that question. You know, one of the things that I wanted to eventually loop back to with this ageism is that you know, what I love about this conversation is that me and you are slightly different in age. We come from different backgrounds. We come from different places. Yes, we're both South African, but we're also quite different. And what I like about this is that we can again have this conversation with two different generations, with two different, and that's kind of why I was so excited to have you on the conversation. So thank you, and I appreciate that, and I just wanted to say that, right? It's really important. So let's just quickly continue to speak about what Ishmael's speaking about. And Ishmael, we've also got to be very careful here, right? When we speak about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we've got to understand that diversity, equity, and inclusion from a political right-wing perspective is a poisonous idea, and from a left-wing perspective is the most important idea in the whole world. Is going to save everything. Okay, so the politically, you have these two extremes of this idea. So you have these people that believe that it'll solve everything. It won't. You have the people that believe that it's poisonous. It's not, right? And I think genuinely from a mental health perspective, you've got to ask yourself a very simple question in life, and continuously ask yourself that question, is how do I confront this thing in my behavior? And I know that sounds kind of weird because you kind of want to go, well, I don't have to take responsibility for the hiring policy of the business. You're right, you don't. What you have to do is you have to ask yourself the question, how do your biases show up when you hire people? How do your biases show up when you look into hiring people? Because Ishmael, it starts with me and you. It has to. It has to. It always has to. It has to start with the group of people. And if it is the case that what I'm saying is true, if it is the case, I'm not saying it's true. I'm saying if it is the case, and they being the decision makers do the same thing, we wouldn't have this problem, right? So see what I'm getting at? I know that when we're working for an organization, when we're working for things, we might disagree with their DIE policy. We might agree with their DIE policy. We might say it's not robust enough. We might say it's too robust. We might do all of those things, but I want to challenge you to, yes, express that. However, start with you. I want to know how you're dealing with it. I want to know what you're doing in your own life to fix your own biases. And so with that, Kwesi, I'm going to ask you, what strategies can I have that help me identify my biases and confront my unconscious biases? And by the way, Rafael, we see your question. We're going to get to you.
Okay, so I think, like I already mentioned the self-awareness one, but I think I need to emphasize that because it might look different to everyone, but self-reflection is really important. As you were speaking, like as we're having this conversation, I'm asking myself all these questions, and I'm like, also, even with coming to Refilo's comments about the young people, I'm like, when I get CVs, I look at the CV and I'm like, oh, 38-year-old, what am I going to do with the 38-year-old? My goodness. Or I get a 20-year-old and I'm like, oh, goodness, this one is even worse. I actually prefer the 38-year-old because this CV is empty. And I don't want, it just, and then what I realized as we were speaking was that from that, that's like the start of the entire relationship and the entire everything that's going to come after. So the foundation is the bias of what I thought of this person and what I believe, the bias, the stereotype. And if I don't address that, then it means the entire relationship is going to be based on that. So whenever this person says something, I'm already thinking she's saying this because she's 20 and she's disrespectful, like what Refilo is saying. And maybe this person is not disrespectful, but because I think 2000s are disrespectful and they think they own the world, I'm already assuming, oh gosh, when is this person gonna leave? So I'm gonna get into the strategies just now, but I think self-awareness, self-reflection, and taking a moment is like the first one. We've already spoken, you've been speaking about this a lot, looking at ourselves before we expect change. And then I think also maybe making time to really check in with yourself intentionally. So when we say self-awareness, you might think, okay, it's a by the way, but I think if we set aside time to really just unpack, ask yourself, end of the day, did I make any assumptions about someone today? If I did, were those assumptions fair? We always talk about journaling and journaling our feelings and our emotions, but maybe we can spice things up by also being very honest with ourselves, because I think that when it comes to us as people who really advocate for mental health, we want people to be okay, we want people to be nice and kind. But maybe somewhere there at the end, you must also just fix yourself and ask yourself, was I being fair in making these assumptions? Did I make any assumptions today? How did my day actually look like? Or maybe even before you leave work, because the more you unpack these thoughts and you question yourself, the more you'll be aware of it the next time. Just like how I'm having this conversation now and I'm reflecting on it and I'm remembering how when I got those CVs, I was very, 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 very biased, and it was not fair to those people who are now no longer there. Had I reflected on this in the beginning, I would have been able to maybe have had a different relationship with them. Maybe I would have communicated some things better. Maybe I would have interpreted some things better. Obviously, mindfulness and meditation really does help us to stay aware and present, and also making an effort to interact with people from different backgrounds, cultures, and exposing ourselves to different people might also remove some biases where you might actually get home and think, oh, I actually worked with Jewish people, and I had no, I mean, I didn't have any idea of how Jewish people were, but from working with them, I had this idea of now how I think Jewish people are nice and how, so really when we expose ourselves intentionally and also unintentionally, where you just open yourself up to different perspectives. Also, I think perspectives is also a nice and important one, where we can have the same background, same culture, same skin color, blah blah blah, but our perspectives might differ and our opinions might differ. That also might help. I know that we have in the world of social media, everyone wants people to believe in the things that they believe in, and we want to convince people to, no, I prefer you with long hair, or I prefer you with short hair. But opening up ourselves to other people's perspectives and opinions without wanting to sway them, even if you can see that a person is going to jump into a river, sometimes it's okay to let them do that because they believe that they can swim even though they can't.
I love
That was a
these.
mouthful.
No, I love these so much, right? So I want to just touch on the interaction and hard work, like working on interacting with people that are different to us, this is such a powerful thing, right? Because we often close to these things because of these biases, but we're also scared of them. Like, we're scared of what the new world paradigm could look like if we don't hold on to these beliefs, because these beliefs to some extent also define us. So
Yeah.
by opening yourself up to losing a belief is a scary thing. By opening yourself up to losing or being open to changing a particular way of seeing the world is a scary thing. It's okay. It's allowed to be scary because a lot of us find our definition in these things. But I love what you've said. It is such a beautiful way to start to break down these unconscious biases by going to. So I like to think of it like I'm Indiana Jones, right? Just bear with me here. I like to think of like I'm Indiana Jones, and I'm on this anthropological search to understand people's subjective worldviews. Like that's what I'm on. I'm on this like massive search to try to uncover exactly how Kwezi sees the world, how she interacts with the world, how it defines the way she sees the world. And I'm like, oh man, I wanna see this. I want to discover this. I want to know this. So I'm on this anthropological search. And so it's not defined in my identity, but my identity towards trying to figure out how she sees the world, how she interacts with the world, etc., etc. And when I do that, I open myself up to having conversations, to seeing things, to being there, to understanding it. So to your point, if I've never worked with a particular cultural group of people, man, what a lovely opportunity I have to do that, to see what Friday Shabbos looks like, to see what Friday prayers look like when I work for a Muslim company, to whatever it is, to open myself to that. We've got to push for that. We've got to push for that. This idea that like you're going to stay in your own little bubble, you're just not going to learn your unconscious biases. You're really not. I then think this idea of self-awareness, where specifically to your point, this deliberateness of checking in, what assumptions did I make today? How do they impact my decision making? Could they have been slightly different if I had thought of it slightly differently, and then work towards that? I must tell you, it's exhausting. It's hard work.
Oh goodness. I mean,
it's hard work, right? We're not like what's the word I'm looking for? Like we're not downplaying the fact this is hard work,
and it takes time as well.
Yeah.
It takes time, and I know we always
Yeah.
think we don't have time. So now adding something else onto my list of things that I need to do on a daily basis. Oh goodness, I can just imagine. But it really helps because the next day, before you take a decision, because now you're aware of this thing, you take a moment. So it will save you the time. So let's rewind. Before, I had to take maybe 10 minutes a day at the end of the day to reflect. But now, because I'm aware of all these things, I can reflect while I'm in the situation. So while I'm having this conversation with Grant, I can easily say, please give me a minute. I just want to process this, and then I'll let you know. Just one moment. Switch off my camera, process, and then come back. But because I don't know, I'm not taking the moments that I owe myself to be doing this, because also we're doing this for ourselves. We're not doing this for other people. But then when we do this for ourselves, it's going to overflow, and then the people around us are the ones that are going to benefit from it.
Yeah, and I mean that in and of itself is the best sentence yet. You're doing this for yourself. because you are happier, healthier, less depressed, less anxious if you live in a world that has less of these stupid biases that impact your mental health and the world around you. So you do the work because this helps you to become a better person, because it helps you to connect with other people, because it helps you to move into an environment where you are excited to see people, meet people, be around people, connect with people, learn from people. And the opposite being this closed off, alone, scared of the world. And by the way, that's where all real bigoted people end. They end in corners where they close themselves off to the world because everything scares them. They are depressed because people are different to them. They are angry people. And none of us want to end up there. None of us want to end up there. You don't want to end up being this angry, bitter human being. You don't really want to open yourself up to this, right? Open yourself up. And Jessica says exactly that. In our day-to-day, it's important to try and see opportunity for us to learn from. I mean, that is that openness. That is that wonderful sort of way of which you want to try to function, right? It's a beautiful thing. So I also want to introduce everybody to, and I'm not going to put on the chat yet. I'm going to put it on the chat at the end. There's a really interesting implicit association test that has been developed by Harvard, and it's called the IAT. And I take the IAT like once every year. And the IAT is not foolproof. You can read about all of its different its mechanisms and how they run it, but it begins to show you. And by the way, you don't put anything in, so it's completely anonymous. Do it at home. Really focus on it when you do it. So don't be distracted by it because it's not going to give you the right results. So try to really focus. But what the IAT gives you is it literally gives you associations between different concepts, and it shows your preference towards certain types of things. And it does everything from ageism to weightism to sexism to everything, right? And it's fascinating because I do it once a year and I can begin to see those things that I must focus on. So like, am I a category, for example, of people that are bigger than me? How do I feel about those particular people? Do I have these implicit biases? And one of the really interesting things that started to happen to me in my life is because of the way in which I grew up, I started to get a preference towards people of a different color to me. In other words, like I was angry at white people. I was angry at, at my grandfather. And as much as that's to some extent justified, sure, you can't then move the bias to the other side because then you're doing the same thing. You're doing the same thing. So for me, it's like it's identifying that, right? It's identifying that I've this pendulum has swung too far right. And it's got to sit in the middle. I've got to see people for people. I've got to remember the past, remember what has happened, work towards fixing what has happened. But I do have got to also see people, see people for who they are and to see that. And so that's something that I want to do. So what I also now want to step into, Kwezi, is once I've done all this work, I'm doing the work now. You can check me. I'm open to this thing. I'm doing the work. Once I'm starting to become aware of my biases, how do we mitigate their negative impact then on my mental health? So we said in the beginning that it's not that easy to change them. How can I start to now mitigate so that I know they exist? How can I start to try to get them to mitigate their effect on my mental health?
I think self-compassion is key, really, honestly. And I know, guys, we always say these things. We say them. Everything that we're mentioning here are things you've heard before. And sometimes I listen to podcasts and I'm like, this is boring. Can you tell me something new? Because I know this. Can you tell me how to use this information that you're giving me? Because if I wanted to hear this, I would have gone onto YouTube and watched the video. But sometimes it's really, really just that. And I think that I'm realizing that the most simplest things are really the hardest. It's easy for us to say we need to be compassionate with ourselves, but I think we are our biggest critics, and it is easy for me to criticize myself because I really want the best for myself, of myself, from myself. And I mean, I can't even unpack self-compassion more than just saying we really need to be kind. And I know we always hear we need to be kind to ourselves as much as we are kind to other people. But it really, really, really is that we need to be kind to ourselves. We need to be able to say, Okay, Kwesi, you were very biased with those students that wanted to volunteer, whether they were 20 or whether they were 38. But what can we do better in the future? You know, it also still brings in the self-reflection. Actually, when Grant was speaking, I was asking myself a question and I was busy trying to ask ChatGPT quickly while you were speaking. But ChatGPT, you're failing me. I was thinking how our past experiences can also lead to biases because
Mm.
I mean we're living life and I might not have a specific bias. I don't even know. I didn't get the answer, but I'm assuming I might not have some biases. I went to an Afrikaans high school. I did like Afrikaans was my home language. So I did
Right,
Wiskunde, I did all my languages in
right.
Afrikaans. Before then, I really didn't live with Afrikaans people. I now moved into that high school. I now
Mm.
go to school with them for 5 years. Now I have an idea of what I think why Afrikaans people are. Does that mean that experience led to the bias? Does that mean I now see people a different way? Not because I believe, because we say stereotypes and biases are thoughts and um, what's this? A preference. Sorry, it's a preference,
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
thought, and then there's the stereotype. Well, I now, when I get it, I actually did. Actually, now that I'm saying this, I actually did get a student who wanted to volunteer who's Afrikaans, and I was like, oh no, we're not
Sure,
doing this. So,
sure.
I hope this is also helping people realize that when we really reflect, and maybe it also is like the thing that I mentioned about having conversations, because I'm now talking about this. I had never had this conversation with anyone, but because
Yeah,
I'm now talking about this, all these things are coming back, and I'm like, okay, students, this, and maybe it's that, it's the self compassion. When I'm now having these conversations, I shouldn't now leave this call feeling like I'm the worst person on earth and I need to go repent and I need to do all these things. I need to be like, okay, it's okay. I mean, it happened, but how can I do this better in the future? Now that I'm aware, what can I do to improve? So I think that's the one. And then we've spoken about journaling, we've spoken about self awareness. And I think therapy, I'm a huge advocate for therapy. I
sure.
know it's expensive. It's really, really, really one day I'm gonna fight so it's more accessible. But I really believe that therapy, and if you can't afford or you don't have access to therapy, like I mentioned, having conversations can be therapeutic, but also being really aware of the people that we have conversations with. We really need
Yeah,
to, we always hear how we need to have a safe space, but I think it is important, especially when you are seeking feedback from someone. Don't look for feedback from someone who does not have good intentions. Sometimes people are in our lives and they love us and they really have good intentions, but we must always remember that we see things, I see things the way I see them based on my own experiences, my own past traumas, my own beliefs and whatever. So all our minds are different. So I might come to you and I might ask you, Grant, what do
yeah,
you think of this and this and this, or how do you think my response was to this? And Grant might say, I think you were mean or you were whatever. I should always take feedback with a pinch of salt. And
yeah,
I think that also speaks to why it's important to know yourself. Like that should be number one foundation, because that's what will root you and that's what will keep you grounded from when people say you are green, you'll be like, nope, I'm not green, I'm orange, because I know it.
sure.
And yet you might say, this other day I was brown because maybe I was having a bad day. But I know in the essence of it, I am actually orange.
Yeah.
Yes, not green.
No, I love it. I really love it. And so much good stuff there, friends. So much good stuff. And it's interesting because we've kind of swayed between these two ideas of challenge yourself, but also kind of love yourself, right? So don't so and that's exactly this balance that I think as you were speaking, I was thinking about all the time. It's like it's this sure we want challenge yourself, be okay to opening up what that looks like, and then love yourself and understand that it's okay, right? Know that remember that these biases have kept you alive. And what I mean by that is the part of the brain that does this is a part of a brain that can it's often referred to as like the quick thinking part of the brain. And the quick thinking part of the brain is the brain that helps us make snap decisions about particular things. And because if you were thinking about something deeply every day, you wouldn't be able to move. You need to be able to stand up and walk and buy and get something. And so we're making good decisions all the time. We're making lots of decisions all the time. Good part of the brain, right? The brain use these heuristics to help us make these things. But what happens is it chucks in a bunch of the other stuff. So it chucks in a bunch of the other stuff that's harmful to you. So as much as it's got this quick thinking, daily decision making, off we go, let's go, go, go. The truth is that on the other side of that, it does the stupid stuff where it starts making decisions about particular people based on the color of the skin and the way they speak. And I think that's this that we're speaking about. So Jade said, how do we separate your bad experiences from your biases? And this is such a good question, Jade. It is such a good question. So what happens is that I have a bad experience with Kwezi. Now all black women are like this. Right. So, and by the way, that is also strengthened by my unconscious biases from my parents and their parents and their parents. I went to a white school. I was born during apartheid. Right. So that just reinforces what my parents have taught me. So my parents have said to me that X about black women. Now Kwezi does that thing to me. I have a bad experience. It just reinforces that. Okay. Now something really, really important to remember. When I try to challenge that belief, my brain doesn't want to challenge that belief because that's hard work for the brain. The brain doesn't want to rewire. So it's called cognitive dissonance. So the brain pushes back and goes, no, 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 no. But you did experience that from Kwezi. And black women are like that. And it's going to keep on pushing you. Because why? Because that's the neural pathways that exist in the brain. It's not easy to want to change that thing. You're going to get cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance is the thing that happens when you're trying to rewrite the pathways in the brain. The brain doesn't like that. The brain doesn't like that. Cognitive dissonance, even if now 90 black women behave differently around me, my brain still goes back to that one, that Kwezi, and the one that my parents taught me, right? So we've got these neural pathways that exist. So gay people are always like this, and then, yeah, I saw it again. There it is. Oh, I keep on seeing it. There it is. I keep on seeing it around me. Yeah, they all like that. I see it on the news. My feed on Twitter tells me the same thing. My feed on Facebook tells me, yeah, they're all the same. Yeah, they just like that. And then I get this reinforced belief all the time that that's how people are. Now you have to start to want to challenge that. And I think, Jade, the first thing I would encourage you to do is to start to identify that humans are humans first, and that they are the owners of their own autonomy, good or bad. So when Kwezi behaves in a particular way, I want to identify that it was Kwezi who behaved that particular way, not the black person that behaved that particular way, not the female that behaved in that particular way. I want to give Kwezi the autonomy of the agency of the individual who owns her own behavior. And when I do that, it's quite fantastic because I separate her from these unconscious biases that I have, and I can identify a particular behavior based on the human. So Jade, you would have had a bad experience of X, right? White men, for example. What I want you instead to do is start to say you've had a bad experience of Grant. Okay, start to say I've had a bad experience of Grant. Start to see Grant as an autonomous human being. Allow Grant his autonomy. Say, okay, it's Grant that treated me like that. It's Grant that did that for me. It's Grant that does that, right? Now you might have 10 experiences of white men that all do the same thing of Grant. Try really hard to identify that in that. If there is a structural problem, we'll start to figure that out as society, which we have started to do, right? But in your own personal capacity, begin to start to see humans for the sake of humans. Start to see them not as a 23-year-old, but see them as a human. Start to see their behavior not as a typical 23-year-old's behavior, but as a typical Jones behavior. Start to see humans as humans. Start to reflect on them, their humanity. Because the moment you do that, it starts to help you. I mean, Monique says all the vegans are all the same. Monique knows I'm vegan.
Okay.
So Monique knows I'm
let's
vegan.
not talk about vegans, Monique, please.
Right. So Monique knows, right? It's exactly that. It's like start to identify people for the sake of people, and start to stop categorizing them by, you know what I hate is like. And I don't mean hate in this sense, but it's so funny. I was reading statistics about knife crime in the UK, right? And they've got this thing in common. A lot of them are young black kids. But it's so lazy to decide that that's the thing that makes them criminals. Because you know what they've also got in common? They don't have moms. You know what they also have in common? They don't have fathers. You know, they also have in common, they all come from environments where their parents have struggled to find food for them to eat. You know what they
Sure.
also have in common? Do you know what I mean? They have 50 things in
There's other
common, and
things.
you pick
Yeah.
you pick the laziest thing. And that
Mm,
thing has nothing to do with the fact that they are into knife crime. It can't.
mm,
Because if it did,
mm,
then all
mm,
black people would be into knife crime. It's not possible. However, the thing that they do have in common is that they come from fatherless homes. Let's deal with that. So also know that
mm,
your unconscious biases are lazy. They're lazy,
mm,
you know, because
mm,
they pick a weird thing to focus on. Ah, Kwesi's black. Aha, that's the thing. No, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that have led Kwesi to making those decisions. And by the way, her blackness probably has got zero impact on that. Zero impact on that.
mhm,
You know, so start to begin to think like that, and it'll help you. So all white men are X. Okay, you're probably right that all white men you've encountered are X. Sure, I agree with you. You probably have had that experience, and we probably see structurally there are a lot of those truths. But are there also something else
mm,
happening? Can we identify those something else, and can that help me to bridge the gap with them?
mm.
Yeah.
I actually was thinking how tiring it is, guys. I'm not saying this to demotivate you. Please don't be demotivated. But in my journey of self-awareness and being all these things that we're talking about now, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, I was just tired. I was tired of challenging my mind and my brain. And I was just like, can I just allow myself to just, because it's really that the
Yeah, it is.
laziness is really us not doing the work. And
Yeah.
it's easier doing that. I mean, I can just walk past someone and I can judge them and move on. But me having someone hoot at me, for example, at the robot, and me not thinking, you what do you call it? Road rage. You've got
Yeah.
me thinking, shame, I wonder what happened this morning. Or I wonder if there's anything wrong, if they're rushing. So it's really exhausting. Why should I care about how other people are feeling? Because I have my own issues and my own problems that I should focus on. But I think if we all
I
really
love it.
take a moment to be like that, we'll live such a happy life and a kind life. And maybe we'll all be hooting at each other on the robots because we all have problems and it's okay for us to do that. So it's really exhausting. But I think I have more peace living like this because I know that I take time to think about things. I take time to process. I'm kinder to people. I'm empathetic. I ask people how they're doing because I really want to know how they're doing, not because I'm asking because we're in passing. But as hard as it is, I think it's worth it. I mean, it's right. It's really hard. I
Well,
wish
look,
I need a 3-week holiday.
but think of the opposite, friend. Think of where you end up. So as
Yes,
much as it's hard now, think of how difficult life is when you're bitter, angry, and scared all the time.
exactly. Or
You know, like,
depressed,
yeah,
anxious.
and bitter,
Yeah.
anger, scared leads you to depression and anxiety. Because
Mm-hmm.
you know what I mean. So exactly to your point, it's like you have options here. You can choose to do the hard work but live a happy, fulfilled life, or you can choose to be bitter, angry, scared of the world around you, angry with everybody that exists in the world. Hey man, your choice, right? One's more
Mm-hmm.
difficult than the other, and you got to
Mm-hmm.
work through it. But you know, at the end of the day, it's the reward is far greater. The reward is far greater.
True.
I want to end off just by saying thank you to everybody for joining us today. I'm going to pop that implicit test on the chat right now. You can have a click on it. Don't do it when you're distracted. Don't do it when you're around people and your kids and you've got work to do. Take time to do it when you've got some time. It'll start to show up some of your implicit biases. As you grow through those biases, use all of these tips and tools that Kwesi have given us today that are going to help us to confront that. And remember that what we're going to end up here with, friends, is if we all behave like this, we change the world. If we all behave like
Mm.
this, we change the world. We move the world into a space where bitter, anger, scared, fear, these are the things of the past, and we grow to a space where we can live the best version of ourselves. So thank you for being here. Kwesi, thank you for being a part of this. I hope that I mean, I just want to thank you. Thank you so much for this conversation. I hope it was as enriching as it was for me. And yeah, I'll see you pretty soon.
It was. Thank you so much. Let's be kind, everyone. I should have copied Man in the Mirror and pasted it here. But
I
please,
know
I'm
we should
also
have.
gonna listen to it now. Let's all listen to Man in the Mirror. Hopefully there's no weird lyrics in that song. And thank you to everyone that joined. I'm gonna be thinking about this conversation from when I walk out of here, and I'll be noticing like my biases, the conscious ones, the unconscious ones. language, because also there's a lot, man, that happens. But thank you so much. I hope it was also insightful for all of you guys, and hope to see you all soon. Thank you, Grant. This
Thank you,
was
my friend.
lovely.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Bye.